Hi, guys. This is R.A. Sweeney here to talk to you about another prayer from the book Prayers from the Time of Jesus. In the last video, we started the bedtime blessings, and now we're going to get into that middle chunk of the bedtime blessings, which is one of my favorite prayers. In Hebrew, this prayer is called the Shema. It comes from Deuteronomy 6, and it was a super important prayer throughout the Old Testament and throughout Jewish culture, and still is a very, very important prayer for Jews today. Um, I'd mentioned when we were talking about the Lord's Prayer um, that the Shema was prayed every day by most Jews, and a lot of devout Jews would pray 3 times a day, would pray the Shema 3 times a day. And so this takes that Shema. There's a little bit of an addition in the middle, but it follows exactly the language of Deuteronomy 6. So the Shema for bedtime would go Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod, Malchuto Leolam Moed, Ve'ahavta et Ya Elohika, Bekal Lebaveka, Ubekal Nafsheka, Uvekal Meodeka. And so it starts out with this word Shema, which can mean hear, also means listen, obey. It has all those ideas put into one. So we talk a lot about, oh, well, maybe you heard me, but you didn't obey me in English. That's not a thing in this word Shema in Hebrew. You can't Shema and like, I heard you, but I didn't obey you. If I didn't obey, if I'm not following what I heard, then I didn't Shema. And it's addressing that command to hear, listen, obey to Israel. In its context, obviously, it was the nation of Israel. I won't get into all the details, but you can follow, especially in like Romans, how Israel has always been God's people, his faithful followers, not necessarily the descendants of Jacob, who was renamed Israel. So it applies to anybody who is a follower of God. And then it also it starts out by asserting that the Lord is our God. Um, we tend to think in our culture that the Bible teaches monotheism, and it really doesn't. There's all sorts of talk about the other gods, and at least in my context, we tend to treat those as like, well, some people worship these things and they call them gods, and they name them things like these, but they don't really exist. But that's not at all how the Bible depicts it. The Bible depicts that there's a whole bunch of spiritual beings, which the word is Elohim, and God is described as Elohim. So our word God would reply to all the spiritual beings if we're translating back and forth pretty faithfully. So the idea isn't that there is only one God and then every other God is made up. The idea is there's lots of gods, but there's only one God who's going to be our God because he's the best of gods. He is far and away from all the other gods. We talked about that idea of God's name being holy. There's a lot of gods out there, but none of them have any business being compared with God because he's so different in magnitude. No one else has the same power or love or generosity or anything that the God that we worship has. And so this is identifying, it uses his name, Yahweh. It says Yahweh is our God. There's a lot of other gods out there. Other people can worship them if they want to. That's up to them. But for us, we're going to worship Yahweh. He's going to be our God. And then it says Yahweh Echad. And the word Echad there can mean one, but it also can mean only. And so most of the time in English, I see this translated one. The Lord is one. But given the context saying that he's our God, I think it makes more sense to say he's our God and only him. We're not going to have a bunch of gods that we're going to worship. He's the only one. We certainly could make the argument that it's saying that he is one God, that he's not, like in pantheism where everything is God, that tree's God and this rock is God. Certainly that's not the way the Bible teaches things, and we could make an argument that's what that's saying. But I translate it, he is our only God, because I think that fits better with, he's the one that is going to be our God, and he's the only one that's going to be our God. And then this is where the original Shema gets split to insert a little bit more. So it says, "Blessed be the name of glory or significance. His kingdom is to the vanishing point and to the end." That's all added in for this prayer. It's not part of the original Shema in Deuteronomy, but it almost seems like whoever drafted this prayer or wrote this prayer started the Shema and was like, man, Yahweh's our God. He's our only God. And isn't his name so great? And isn't his kingdom the best? And it's going to last forever. So almost like he just couldn't hold it in as he was praying through this prayer, reflecting on it. He just added in this idea of like, man, his name is better than all other names, just like what we see in the Lord's Prayer. And this idea of like, I can't wait for his kingdom to come because it's going to cover all creation. It's going to cover all time. It's going to be this wonderful kingdom that we get to be a part of. And then he goes back to the prayer. And you shall love the Lord your God in all of your heart. So your heart would be where your emotions are from and things like that. So in all of my ability to show emotion, I need to be loving God. And then it moves on to all of your soul. And soul there is your life. It's not like your spirit or like this abstract, ethereal thing that lives inside of you, kind of, and maybe can come out of you in a near death experience, or when you die, it comes out of you and goes up to heaven or anything. It's your life. It is your being. It is the totality of you. So you see this with, especially with like ships, like, oh, there were 12 souls aboard. It's complete beings is the way that the word nefesh in Hebrew works there. So in all of your like emotional capacity, in all of your life and being. And then usually we translate this last word strength, but it's the Hebrew word meodika, which is your much. So you've got two words there that sound very similar in Hebrew. One is much and one is little or few. And this is much. So it's not necessarily strength. Strength definitely makes sense here, and I think is part of what it's talking about. But I think it's getting more at like in all that you have in abundance. So if you're strong, you use your strength. If you are rich, you use your wealth. If you are popular, you use your influence, or whatever the case, whatever you have much of, that's what you need to be using. So it's with all of your emotional capacity, with all of your being, and with all the abundance that you have. All of that should be directed toward your love for God. You should be loving Him with all of those things. So, like I mentioned, it comes right out of Deuteronomy 6. So, there's a whole page that quotes that Deuteronomy passage there. And if you look at the larger passage from Deuteronomy, you can tell it really focuses on God liberating his people from Egypt, is where this is coming from. So it's like, hey, Israel, you know how God rescued you out of the terrible suffering and slavery that you were just in and turned your low, enslaved, miserable life into this life of abundance and generosity and mercy and love, all those things. So you should love him for that. He should be your God because he's the one who did that. He should be your only God because he's the one who did that. And then you should love him in all these ways because he took your shame and your reproach and the hardship and the slavery and the death of your former life that you lived in. And he has pulled you out of that. He's rescued you from it and liberated you from it, set you free into his kingdom where there's life and abundance and freedom. And so that's really where the background for this prayer comes from, the motivation for this prayer. And so it introduces, hey, this is who our God is, and he's going to be our only God. And then it moves into this kind of impromptu prayer, is how I think of it, because it's not in the original scripture. It's like the person who came up with this prayer just had to stop and praise God because he's awesome, his kingdom's going to be awesome, and I'm just excited for it. And then follows up with that. So because his kingdom's going to be awesome, and because he's our God, because he's done these wonderful things for us, let's love him in all these different ways and with everything we have. One other thing I want to point out, Jesus, when he quotes from the Shema, he's asked what the most important command is, and the first part of what he says is the most important command is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So mind isn't really an idea that translates into Hebrew, and so he kind of separated that out from what he thought the Hebrew was talking about. And so we can also add in that idea to it's loving God with your thoughts, thoughts and with the things that you plan, with what you purpose your mind to, with using your mind in ways that are God honoring, and that can tie in as well. So that is the middle part of the bedtime blessings, which would be the bedtime Shema. We've got one more part that we'll talk through. It's the longest part of this prayer, so we will get to that in the next video. But for now, I hope this was a blessing for you, and stay tuned as we keep working through the prayers from the time of Jesus. Thank you.